Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and tonight we will discuss my stuff. My spooky vampire stuff. I don't know if you know this about me, but I have a Patreon. I know, right? I never mention it. How would you have known? I've been recording vampire reviews for many years now, and you may have noticed that my background situation has changed over the years. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. This is because I've moved home several times, and also I've grown in my macabre accoutrement. And people ask me all the time, what is all that stuff behind you? Tell us about it. Where did you get it? What is it? We want to know. So I made it one of my Patreon goals to do a shelf tour and tell you all about it, since you all wanted to know so badly. This is for you. Thank you so much to my Patreon patrons for helping us reach that goal. You asked for it? Here it is. Stuff has come and gone over the years. I've gained things, I've lost things, I've given things away. Skulls have gone to where skulls go when they die. I go through a lot of skulls. And you may have noticed that I've acquired quite a few more books. This goes all the way up and all the way down. I moved home about a year ago, and I wanted to set up this space specifically for vampire reviews. This is the first time in my life I've actually had an office in my home, and that's where my crypt is located. But you may recall that before I got this situation, I was filming in my library next to a different bookshelf, and many of the books on that shelf are still in the library. I keep the books that I like to show off to guests in the library, because I have guests. I have friends. People come to my house sometimes. And these books are all my shameful dark secret vampire books. Not that I'm ashamed. But I brought up some books from my library as well, just in case you wanted to see those too, since I have switched shelves since I promised the video. But let us begin with the stuff. So let's start at the top. These are my vampire toys, which have a space on the top shelf. These are Beanie Babies, which I used to collect Beanie Babies, like one of those crazed kids from the 90s, because I was a crazed kid in the 90s. But the bats and the skeleton death get a place of honor on my vampire shelf. The rest are, you don't need to know where they are. This is a Vamplet, which is an amazing plush toy. I got it at New York Comic Con several years ago. It was actually bought for me by Pa Dugan. You may know him. And it came with a little baby bottle full of blood to feed the Vamplet, which I never opened because you have to keep things pristine for them to have value. See, she still has her little tag. Her name is Evelyn Nocturna, because of course it is. She was the cutest. They have a whole line. They also have some werewolves and, other creatures of the night. We have a few other lovable toys which actually aren't vampire related, but I love them anyway. This little heartless lawn gnome thing. This is Edgar Allan Poe. He's got a little raven. And this is a Phantom doll. See, he's got a mask and he's adorable underneath. Phantom of the Opera being my other great love besides vampires. These are all the vampire movies that I own. And I don't own that many vampire movies. I actually have to use digital files for every video I record, so I get most of my movies in digital form, but I do own a few. Most of them were gifts. This is a mask, which my brother gave me, and it looks like a bat. This little candelabra thing was given to me by my dear friend Danny Roth. It's also from that same New York City Comic Con. Danny Roth also gave me this Buffy steak, which he got from Etsy, and it's quite authentic, for all my slaying needs. I have a bottle of formerly Skal vodka. There's no vodka left in this bottle for, you know, scientific reasons. The Skull and Raven Salt and Pepper Shaker. More Skull Salt and Pepper Shakers. People give me a lot of Skull-related salt and pepper shakers. This little bat is from Scotch Straws. It's an original, and he gave it to my friend Lindsay to give to me, and I love it, and it lives on my shelf. These are my wall bats. They were actually a wedding gift, and they used to be on my wall in my old set, and I need to figure out how to get them back on the wall, because wall bats belong on the wall. They're very important. Skull shot glass. I have a full set of these. This is a vampire game called Vampire Smarts, where you have to answer vampire trivia questions, and I actually haven't played this game yet, mainly because no one's willing to play it with me. This is Dracula Resurrection, the PC game, which I have played, and I was not very good at it, but that was a long time ago, and I'm thinking about trying it again. Maybe I will try this one out when I'm done having my fun with Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. If you want me to, you let me know. I do this for you. This is my Eerie Origami Set for making all of my spooky origami needs. I've got 2 volumes of Helsing, which I stole from my brother. Not the same brother who gave me the mask, my other brother. And of course, I've got a copy of Awoken up here, because you should have one in every room. So these arty things are from a very awesome book, which I will show you in a minute when we start talking about all the books. But this is my Bram Stoker portrait. We've got Louis and Claudia from Interview with the Vampire, the best vampire movie, and some film strip looking things from the original Dracula. This is my Barnabas Collins ring. Oh, I should be wearing that. I got this to do my Dark Shadows review, and I've had it ever since. It became an integral part of my arrangement. This is my skeleton hand, and it's missing a finger because Paul cut the finger off to make me a necklace out of it, which was really sweet. He gave it to me for Christmas, a skeleton finger necklace, which has significance, which you will learn about one day, but I'm not at liberty to divulge that yet. This cross was given to me by an actual Catholic, and I thought it was vampire-y, so I put it on my set, but it's actually just a regular, normal Catholic cross. But, you know, it goes with my steak aesthetic when I'm feeling a little bit unsympathetic to my sympathetic vampires. This Toreador pin was given to me by one of the World of Darkness guys who I met at UndeadCon several years ago, which is also where I met Juliet Lando and Anne Rice for the first time. It was a good con. This little guy was given to me by my mom, and he actually came with chocolate in the box in the back, and I ate all the chocolate. It was delicious. But he has a permanent home on my shelf now. He used to have a adorable top hat, but my minion ripped it off in a fit of minion rage and toddlerhood. We've got the vampire perfume, which you may recall. Fun times. I still have it. No, I have not used it up by wearing it so often. Sure haven't. This is the Cuvée Lestat wine, which Nella and I drank together in our vampire beverages review. I also have a bottle of the vampire wine. This is the Pinot Noir, and I used to get this by the case. Did you know that after I did my vampire wine review so many years ago, the company of vampire wine reached out to me and they were like, hey, we liked your review. We're going to send you a free bottle of vampire wine. And they did, and it was delicious. I think that's it for the spooky vampire knickknacks. I know I used to have a lot more on my shelves, and now it's kind of mostly just books. So if there was something that used to be on my shelf that you're curious about, let me know. I will answer your comments and explain everything to you. If you want to find out more about where any of these things came from, just ask, and I will send you links if I can. Now, on to the books. We're going to be here a while. So yeah, we're gonna need some wine for this one. Oh, that's no vampire wine. Where to begin? I guess I'll just go left to right. So, you sure you're ready for this? Maybe this wasn't exactly what you meant when you asked for a bookshelf tour, but I love books. I don't know if you could tell. And vampires. And I love books about vampires, and I have a lot of them, and I do want to share them all with you, so that's what we're going to do here tonight. This is the graphic novel version of Anne Rice's The Vampire Lestat. Yeah, it's the full compiled version. This came out in multiple issues, and I had every issue except issue 2. So a friend bought me this whole thing just so I could get issue 2 because that was the only way we could find it. I don't know where you can find this anymore, but it is amazing. And it sticks pretty close to the book. These are American Vampire Volumes 1 and 2, which I will do a review on one of these days. Oh. They were given to me by a wonderful friend who loves comic books. Guess who? Volume 1's co-authored by Stephen King, and yeah, he trash talks Twilight at the beginning. These vampires don't sparkle. We're real vampires. We'll talk about these one day. This is Patrick the Vampire, which is an amazing webcomic that I just had to have the print edition from, but you can read it all online. Just Google it, Patrick the Vampire. It's amazing. This is Dracula the Undead, which is an official, unofficial sequel to Dracula written by one of his descendants, well, co-written. And it's terrible. I did not like this book. If I ever make that worst vampire books I've ever read video, this will be on there, and then I will tell you why I didn't like it. I bought this book at a used bookstore because it had vampire on the spine and I thought it would look pretty on my shelf. I have not read it yet, but it's called The Reformed Vampire Support Group, and I'll get to it one of these days. It doesn't have a book jacket, but it's, you know, got a nice coffin red interior, so it's gotta be great, right? Because so many vampire books are great. So many are great. I have book 1 in the Southern Vampire Mysteries. I've read all of them on ebook, and I actually own them all on ebook, but I didn't have any hard copies because when I was living in New York City, I didn't have room for hard copies of books in my tiny apartment, other than what you saw on the screen. So I actually found this at a used bookstore, which you never find the first one at a used bookstore. So of course I had to snatch it up. And one day when I have so many shelves to spare, I'd love to own all the Southern Vampire Mysteries, even though I don't like them all, but just because I've read them all, and I should have their heads hanging on my wall. I mean, trophies on my shelf. These 3 books are riding on the coattails of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, where they take a classic literature and add monsters, in this case vampires, and there's a lot of these out there, but this is my favorite, Fangs, which was a gift given to me when I was in the hospital after my minion spawn was born, so that was a nice gift. This is Mr. Darcy Vampire, which I actually stole from one of those restaurants where they have books that you can just take, so it wasn't really stealing, but kind of was. I think I was supposed to give it back when I was done reading it, and I never did, and this is a terrible book. And of course, Wuthering Bites, which I've mentioned before, which I haven't gotten around to reading yet, but it's gonna be great. Heathcliff's love could save her. His thirst could kill her. It's gotta be better than Mr. Darcy Vampire, right? This is The Vampire in Love, which is part of the Little Vampire series, the German series we discussed in a previous video by Angela Sommer-Brodenberg. And this is actually my Minion Spawns book, but I'm keeping it safe for him on my vampire shelf until he is old and skilled enough to read it. And this was actually sent to me by Angela Sommer-Bodenberg for my spawn after she watched my video on the Little Vampire and liked it, apparently, enough to send us a book, which was so sweet of her. A tip to all of you who make videos, you never know who's watching. First vampire wine, then this. The Journal of Professor Abraham Van Helsing. This was also a gift from a friend, and it's terrible. This is a terrible book. This goes on my worst vampire books list. I gotta get around to making that video. Vampires of Manhattan by Melissa de la Cruz, who is famous for the Blue Blood series, which I've read, and this is kind of a spin-off, the new Blue Bloods coven, the older, not YA version of that vampire mythos. And I actually got this book at BookCon, Book Expo, many years ago. And I stood in a very long line, and I got to meet Melissa de la Cruz when I got it. And that was fun. Here's a couple Anne Rice books. This is The Vampire Armand, and Interview with the Vampire Claudia's story, which is a graphic novel version of Interview with the Vampire from Claudia's point of view, which I talked about before when I was answering your Q&A. And most of my Anne Rice lives on my library bookshelves because they deserve a place of honor, but these ones were the right shape and size for the vampire bookshelf, so that's why they're here. Along with the Animage comic special, the manga version of Interview with the Vampire. Very sexy, very fanficky, very beautiful. In Japanese, which I took Japanese in high school so I can kind of read it, but just get it for the pictures. I found this on eBay, since a lot of people ask me that. I don't know where you can find it now. Precious. You want to see my Anne Rice collection? Here it is, of the vampire books. I also have some of her other books, but these are the fancy hardbacks that live in my fancy library, which I just don't have room for on the shelf. I do have my loaner copies of Anne Rice, these very falling apart paperbacks, which I bought when I was in high school because I had read all the books at the library and I wanted to own them, so I got them on half.com. Remember half.com? It was like the book version of eBay. So I bought these for like 16 cents each and owned them until I was equipped enough to actually buy the fancy hardbacks. And actually some of these I found for free in giveaway piles, but a lot of them were from used bookstores or gifts from friends. They're so pretty, so heavy. She writes a lot of words. This is Ravenloft I Strawed, The Memoirs of a Vampire by P L Arad, which is based on, you know, D&D and stuff. And this is actually what I'm reviewing next, so I should start reading this. This was sent to me by the Patreon patron who requested me to review this, which I'm going to do very soon. So look out for that video coming soon. I'm gonna save this over here. You know, you gotta keep your throat moistened with the wine in order to lubricate the facilitation of vampire books. This is Anno Dracula by Kim Newman, which a lot of you ask me about. Yes, I own it. I found it at the used bookstore where I've found a lot of books. Actually, a friend of mine used to work at that used bookstore, so I got a really good discount on top of them being already used and discounted. And I haven't read it yet. And I don't know when I'm going to be able to get to it, so if you want me to review this, you could come over to my Patreon and request it maybe. Or just wait, I'm sure I'll get to it eventually. You can always just wait. I've got a copy of Guilty Pleasures, which was in the free bin at the used bookstore. Who would give this away for free? Actually, I haven't read it yet. I haven't read any of the Anita Blake Vampire Hunter series. But another Patreon patron, one of you, requested that I review this book. So I'm going to be doing that soon. Look out for that. Coming down the pipeline, the vampire pipeline of blood. I actually also found at a different used bookstore this Marvel Comics adaptation of this book. So when I review it, I'll have pictures to show you to go along with it so you don't just have to look at my face talking to you about this book. Actually get to see some vampire visuals. I haven't read this either yet. It looks very pretty. Some more vampire fiction. We have Red Death by P L Arad, a classic. I haven't read it. Got it used very recently. It's on my list. We'll get to it one of these days. Sunshine by Robin McKinley. This was just given to me as a birthday gift very recently. My birthday's in May, if you want to know. It was May 1st. Yes, I'm a Taurus. Least vampire-y sign ever. So I haven't read this yet, but I've heard good things and I've heard bad things, so I'm curious how it will stack up. But thank you to my birthday gift pen pal for sending this to me. George R. Martin's Fever Dream, which we have to get to very soon, I think. And this is Daughters of Shadow and Blood by J. Matthew Saunders, which I just read for my book club. Yes, I have a book club. I actually started a book club in my local town because I wanted people to read books with me, and you gotta trick people into being your friend somehow, right? And this was actually really good. This is a prequel to Dracula about one of his vampire brides. And there's actually a series. There's 2 more books about the other 2 vampire brides, but highly recommend this one. Maybe we'll talk about it in depth, and I'll actually, I just say in depth. And I'll give it a proper review since I have read it and I did like it. And he is an author that's local to me in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where I live now. that I'm no longer in New York City or LA adjacent. I always like to support local authors. That's why I started a book club. This is the Twilight 10th anniversary special edition that has Twilight in the front and Life and Death in the back. Life and Death is the gender swapped version of Twilight where Bella's a boy and Edward's a girl, and you know, it's not misogynist because when you switch the roles and they do the same thing, it's okay now. I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I don't know. Someone requested on Patreon, then I'll talk about it. If you want it, then I'll do it. But of course I own it because, okay, you may have noticed that I have all the Twilight books, including the graphic novels, some even in hardback and paperback. There's a reason for that. No, I'm not secretly a Twilight fan. I've expressed my feelings on Twilight multiple times. No, it's not the worst thing ever, and it does get a lot harsher criticism than it deserves because people like to hate on things that teenage girls like, but yeah, it has its problems. And I used to live in an apartment building, and in the basement of the apartment building, there was a book take and leave. You could drop off old books, you could take old books, you could do whatever you wanted, read them while you were doing your laundry, and people like to give away Twilight a lot. So I thought I should take a copy of Twilight from my vampire shelf because it'll be funny in the background of my videos. And then I had one, and then another, and then I had to have the whole set because you may not realize this, but I'm a bit of a collecting hoarder. So I had some in paperback and some in hardcover because that's just what people were throwing away. And then my friend who worked at the used bookstore helped me get the whole set in matching hardback. So now I don't know what to do with these paperback copies. Does anyone want them? Do you want my copy of Twilight? I don't just want to throw them away because they're books and books are precious, even these books. But of course, when my bookstore friend told me that they had Life and Death and they had the graphic novels, I had to get them too. I need a vampire bookshelf of shame and a vampire bookshelf of pride. Because you see all these books right here? These are all the books that live in my library, the ones that I show off to my friends. And that's getting full too. And if I took the vampire books off there, maybe I could put something here. But then I would just be drowning in books. Not that I don't like to just sit and admire my books sometimes. I have friends. These are the Vampire Files, volumes 1 and 2, also by P L Arad. I found these at a library sale. I'll get to them. The Mammoth Book of Vampires, which is a collection of spine-chilling vampire short stories. Some are okay and some are pretty awful. The Times review says, there's a lot of life in the undead yet, and this collection proves it. I don't know that it proves it. But it's got a pretty cover. What are these? Oh, these are fake playbills. These also came out of that book, the same as those cards that I showed you, the Bram Stoker portrait and stuff. We'll get to that book very soon, the book these all came out of. Vampires, Wine, and Roses, another short story collection with a gorgeous cover. I don't care if the stories are terrible. Look, there's art and blood splatters on the corner of every page. Screaming bat skulls on the back. It's just a pretty book. And it's called Vampires, Wine, and Roses, and we have all those things. Vampire Stories collection, which I bought this because it has a short story from Bram Stoker, Dracula's Guest, which was a deleted scene from Dracula or something, you know. And also one from Anne Rice, which she doesn't write a lot of vampire short stories. So that's a rare thing. And it's a pretty book. You may be able to tell that I'm kind of into books in a physical way, not in a creepy way. They're so pretty. This is a copy of Dracula, which lives on my vampire shelf because I have many copies of Dracula, and so some are in my library, my place of honor, and some are in my vampire shelf, my place for sharing with you. And this one is up here. This one is illustrated by Edward Gorey, who did the artwork for the Hamilton Dean Dracula when it was on Broadway, you know, back in the 70s. And I love Edward Gorey's art. Even if he doesn't usually do vampire stuff, he's dark and creepy. So this fun version of Dracula, illustrated by Edward Gorey. How many copies of Dracula do I own? Let's see. This many copies of Dracula. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I kind of thought it'd be more than that. This one is small and cute with gilt edges, and it's part of my teeny tiny gothic book collection. This one is illustrated by J. Lee, and it's got this really cool comic booky style of illustration. This one is Dracula and Istanbul, which is a Turkish bootleg of Dracula, and actually changes a lot from the original story, so I don't know that it really counts, but it's really cool, and it was brought into English by Ed Glazer. You may know him. We gotta talk about this more in depth one of these days. This is Powers of Darkness, the Icelandic translation of Dracula, translated back into English, where when Bram Stoker came out with Dracula in England, it was censored. They didn't let him put out exactly what he wanted, and he edited it as per his publisher's requirements until it was appropriate for what they wanted to publish. But he was able to release in Iceland the version that he originally intended. So this is like the director's cut of Dracula, which is sexier than what we know today as Dracula. So if you want to find out what Bram Stoker really wanted Dracula to be, this is the book to check out. This is the Annotated Dracula by Leonard Wolfe, which is the classic Annotated Dracula. And this one is the Annotated Dracula by Leslie Klinger. And if you read Klinger's annotations, he throws a lot of shade at Wolfe's annotations. So, drama, Dracula drama. Yeah, 6, 7 copies of Dracula. I have 111 copies of Phantom of the Opera. I can't collect all the things. Maybe I can. I like books. This is Something in the Blood and Hollywood Gothic, both by David J. Skal, the premier Dracula scholar of all Draculadom in Dracula's history. This is the biography of Bram Stoker, and this is the story of how Dracula came to Hollywood. If you want to know anything about the history of Dracula, read these. I use these books a lot in my Nosferatu video, which you may recall, and in a few of my other videos as well. David J. Skal is my go-to for research, and we're actually Facebook friends, but I don't think he knows that we're Facebook friends. I think he friends everybody on Facebook, but you know, I can just pretend that we're friends. Maybe he knows who I am. One day, when they stop calling me a vampire critic and a vampire scholar and start calling me a vampire expert, I may rise to the very edges of the periphery of David J. Skal's world. The Vampire Defanged is another nonfiction reference book of vampire lore and vampire tropes. And okay, so after Twilight came out, there were tons of vampire books that are like, The Secret History of Vampires, and most of them were cheaply put together. They were awful. They didn't say anything new or anything interesting. They were riding on the coattails of this book, The Vampire Encyclopedia, and The Vampire Defanged was one of them, but this one's actually good. I actually learned a lot from this book, so do recommend, but watch out for a lot of those other books because it's just people trying to ride on Twilight's coattails. You'll notice they all came out 10 years ago. The Vampire Encyclopedia, I always check this book before I do a review just to see what it says and see if there's anything interesting about what I'm talking about, but a lot of it's just this vampire thing exists. But every once in a while you'll get to an article that you can tell the authors cared about, and that's the reason why they made this book. And if it was just those articles put together, I think it would be a lot more interesting than trying to reference every single vampire thing that ever vampired. This is the revised edition that came out after Twilight. I had the other edition that used to have Lost Boys Kiefer Sutherland's face on the cover, but I sold that when I moved, when I was trying to raise money for my move, because I didn't need 2 editions. And I didn't have room because I was in a tiny New York City apartment, going to another tiny New York City apartment. But now that I have room, maybe I'll get that one back, because it was a lot prettier than this one. I check this a lot less now that I have learned a lot more about vampires through doing these reviews. I feel like I could be teaching this book lessons. This is Vampires in Their Own Words, an anthology of vampire voices about people who believe they are actually vampires. Yeah. These these two books were sent to me by a wonderful member of my audience. They are by John Edgar Browning, who is another Dracula scholar, and the person who sent them to me was actually one of his students. This is Dracula in Visual Media, which is a reference collection. So if I ever remember that Lucy video I did where I had to talk about 14 different versions of Dracula, just 14. This is all the versions of Dracula listed, indexed as a reference. You know, when I used to work on Loose Cannon with my friend Lindsay Ellis, and we used to make Loose Cannon videos together, I helped her with her research. People asked us to do Dracula all the time. Do you know how many versions of Dracula there are? This many. Talking about just 14 for my Lucy video, because Lucy's not in all of them. This is Dracula, the Critical Feast. Dracula has this reputation of not being received well by critics when it first came out, and that's not true. And this is a collection of all the reviews and articles that were written about it, the way the critics actually responded to Dracula, proving that they kind of liked it. Dracula did pretty well. People like Dracula. The Vampire Film, From Nosferatu to Twilight. Another reference book that I frequently check for interesting tidbits, ideas, points of view whenever I'm reviewing a piece of media that actually is in this book. And this doesn't include every vampire thing ever, and a lot of the articles are, it exists. But there are some really good essays in here about some vampire media, so another highly recommended book. I would recommend this over the Vampire Encyclopedia, just because the people who wrote the articles in here really did seem to care about the media they were talking about and had a lot of knowledge instead of just writing a random essay for a book without actually caring about it, which is what the other one feels like. Varney the Vampire, all of it. Yeah, Varney the Vampire was a penny dreadful series in the Victorian age, and Varney was the first reluctant vampire and inspired a lot of following vampire fiction, but it was, you know, cheaply written, basically pulp fiction, and it just goes on. I have not read it yet. I've skimmed it, but my mother gave me this book. It's a Christmas gift, so thank you, Mom. This collected edition actually has some really interesting essays and notes analyzing Varney, which is the good part, because you can read Varney for free online. It's in Project Gutenberg. It's public domain, but if you want the meta-analysis, this is a good copy. Well, this is a vampire paper doll book. Look, we got Edward and Bella and Dracula and Buffy and Spike, and they're all in here as paper dolls. And there's a lot of vampire lore, like there's Kali, because people think Kali, you know, the actual goddess Kali is kind of vampire-y, and it goes to cinematic vampires. There's Vampira, Christopher Lee. I'm never actually going to cut these dolls out of this book, but they're pretty to look at. Though I don't get what the point of cutting out an entire vampire doll and putting it on a naked vampire body. Who we've got Cain and Lilith. I actually talked about this paper doll book on a stream I did a long time ago. I haven't streamed in forever. If you guys want me to stream and talk about stuff, let me know, because I'm never going to assume that people actually want to listen to me talk if they don't request it. I'm an introvert. This is Edward Gorey's Dracula Toy Theater, and this is like one of the coolest things on my shelf. So Edward Gorey did the set and scene design for Hamilton Dean's play Dracula when it was on Broadway in the 70s, which inspired the Frank Langella movie. And this has like pop-out pieces. You know, there's Dracula's coffin that you can put together and make into a toy theater. All the characters. All the set design, and you put their little characters in there, and you can just play around with your Dracula dolls. And I cannot wait until my fledgling spawn is old enough to play with this. I've had this for years, just saving it. So pretty. And I love Edward Gorey. This isn't that old. It's not from the 70s. I bought it in a regular bookstore like 10 years ago, so it's probably something you could still find. Now this is that book I keep talking about. This is Romancing the Vampire by David J. Skal, our friend. And this is one of the coolest books. I found this on the clearance rack at Borders bookstore when they were going out of business. And it is a visual book that is full. Oh my gosh, it's falling out. It's so full. Pockets and slips and secret hidey holes and pictures of vampire-related media. And all the metadata discussing what all the things are from movies, from classic art, from actual mythology. There's postcards, there's playbills, there's letters from authors. There's all this cool stuff that you just pull this book apart. And I bought 2 of them because they were on clearance for like $6. So I have one that I took apart and I've used as set decoration for vampire reviews. Just sticking these posters up everywhere. It's got everything from Nosferatu to Vampire Hunter D posters. It's got the playbill for Lestat. It's got these film strip things. It's got fake vampire fangbite tattoos. This was a wonderful book, and the amazing David Skal put it together. And I can't believe it was on clearance. I'm assuming that means it didn't do very well. It was, again, around the time when vampire books were everywhere, trying to catch those Twilight coattails. And I think the Twilight crowd wasn't into something like this because it wasn't sexy, romantic vampire boyfriends. It's just a lot of cool vampire media, and I own 2. This is the one that I've taken apart and used, and the other one I do not touch. It is in pristine condition right over there. I guess you can't see it in this pile of books, but it exists. This was actually the first of David J. Skal's books I ever owned. It's got bumper stickers. It's where my Blackula sticker came from. Any Munster, who's not a vampire, but, you know, Buffy, True Blood, everything. It's great for set decoration. It comes in a cool box. But this is what let me know that David J. Skal existed, which led me to all his actually fabulous reference books, which I use when I'm doing research and preparing my scripts for my vampire reviews. So down here we have all the Twilights and my loaner copies of Anne Rice that I mentioned, and a few other books that are, you know, trade paperbacks and they don't look that great on the shelf, so they kind of live down here out of sight. Shelf of shame. This is Holiday with a Vampire, which is a romance novel, which I have not read, but was at that used bookstore, so I picked it up for 99 cents. I thought it might be fun to read one day. This is The Vampire of New York, again from the used bookstore. Haven't read it yet. We'll get to it. This is Undead and Unwed, which is super chiclety and about a hot, sexy vampire boyfriend. There's a whole series of these books, and they got popular kind of after the Charlene Harris Sookie Stackhouse novels. And this was loaned to me by a friend who I used to work with, and I was supposed to give it back to him, and I never did. So if you're out there and you want it back, let me know. Sorry. Down here we have the entire Kitty Norville series, which we discussed the first 5 before. And as you may recall from that video, I really liked them. I got the first 5 at that used bookstore, and they only had 5. The last one actually was only 50 cents, so I had to get it. But I couldn't find the others. I could find them online, but you know, books are expensive. So one of my wonderful followers offered to send me the rest, and then did. And now I have them, and I'm loving them. I haven't gotten through all of them yet, but maybe I'll do a video on the rest once I get through, because, I mean, they're werewolf books. Kitty's a werewolf. But there are vampires, and the vampires are important. They do matter. So maybe we could talk about those again someday. Thank you for sending them to me. Thank you, everyone who's given me so many of these gifts. Like this copy of Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles here, given to me by my wonderful friend Lindsay Rebar, who you may recall from our 50 Shades of Green Awoken videos. We interviewed her, Lindsay and I. It's gilt-edged, and it has the first 3 Anne Rice novels. Not that I don't already own them, but this one's different and better, so I had to have it, so thank you. Oh, another bottle of vampire wine. I have not kept every single bottle of vampire wine I've ever drank, because that'd just be surrounded in bottles. I used to keep all my wine bottles, stick roses in them, but, you know, I had to move and I had to get rid of some of them, so I kept the 2 prettiest ones, and this unassuming black box is full of my vampire comics. Vampire comics, you say? Yes, I already showed you my ones that are on the shelf, the ones that have pretty spines so they get on the shelf, but these are the ones that are they wouldn't display very well, so I keep them in here. I have all of the Anne Rice's Innovation Interview with the Vampire comics. All 12 single issues. I don't have the collected version of those. I have all but volume 2 of the Vampire Lestat, which I don't really need anymore, I guess, since I have the collected, but they're different. I have to keep them because they're different. But there are non-Anne Rice things in here. Oh, look! Barney the Vampire, The Feast of Blood. This is from that Romancing the Vampire book. I should put this on my wall. Maybe up here. Yeah, Feast of Blood. Oh, this is the note that the author of The Little Vampire sent me, and my fledgling spawn sent me a lovely letter. And some swag. Saving that forever. Dark Shadows, Dynamite Entertainment Classic, Volume 1. Marvel's Vampires, The Marvel Undead. You know, the one where Jubilee's a vampire? Yeah. Again, given to me by my comic book friend. Guess who? And, well, we need to discuss this someday. And of course, all of the Victorian Undead Sherlock Holmes versus Dracula. We need to talk about this. So that's it for my bookshelf. But Maven, you're saying, what's this giant pile of books beside you? Actually, it's not that giant. I've gone through a bunch of them. So these are all my comic graphic versions of Dracula. Dracula the graphic novel. It's not bad. This Dracula graphic novel is part of a series that I have other Gothic novels. I collect Gothic novels, especially illustrated versions of Gothic novels. Not just Dracula and not just Phantom of the Opera, but Jekyll and Hyde, Wuthering Heights, Edgar Allan Poe, Dorian Gray, Frankenstein. I collect them all when I can afford to. This is a gorgeous children's book illustrated version of Dracula. A lot of wolves. This is a Marvel graphic novel. As you can see, very old school graphic novel in that it's a novel with illustrations. I mean, they call it graphic novel, but the old school term of a graphic novel. Gorgeous. And this illustrated children's version of Dracula was sent to me by an amazing friend. Thank you. You can never go wrong with vampire gifts, especially books. These are some monster books, which I've collected from my Gothic bookshelf. This one is Monsters, Zombies, and Vampires, and More, a marvelous monstrous encyclopedia. It's a children's book, but of course I had to buy it. And when my spawn is old enough, we will read it together, and he will receive his proper education on monsters and vampires, especially, even if he likes zombies better. This is Monsters, a field guide to bloodthirsty beasts, and it pretends like it's actually a field guide, like all of these cinema monsters actually really exist. Oh, the Hulk's in here. I guess he's a monster. Oh, Angel from Buffy's in here, and it has like field guide details and stats on all of these monsters. Not all of them are vampires, but there are a lot of vampires in here, so of course that counts. Universal Monsters, a cavalcade of horror, another illustrated graphic novel version of all the different Universal monster films that there are. Well, not all of them. Mummy, Frankenstein, Dracula, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. Of course, Phantom of the Opera is not included because he never is. Here is Fledgling, which we have discussed. An amazing book. This is the entire Quincey Harker series by John G. Hartness. Who's John G. Hartness, you ask? Why, he owns the publishing company that's publishing my book, The Company of Death. Maybe. They might change the title. Coming out later this year. So, of course I had to buy his Quincey Harker books. You know who Quincey Harker is, right? In Dracula, Mina and Jonathan Harker named their son Quincey after Quincey, the cowboy who dies slaying Dracula. It's canon. That's actually in Dracula. So this author has written a series of that person grown up and slaying vampires, as you do. And this is an entire collection of novellas, so these are full of short novels collected, and they're amazing. The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova. Think the Da Vinci Code meets Dracula, but with a female protagonist. This is a wonderful book. I love it. My copy is all ripped up because I actually found it in the basement of that giveaway book pile. I had read it on ebook, but I wanted to own it, and you know, the spine's pretty, so it looks good on the shelf. It Maybe one day I'll get a copy that's not ripped up. Let the Right One In, which we have discussed before. Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. Yes, it is a vampire book. A lot of people think of it as like a Harry Potter pastiche, but one of the main characters is a vampire. I can't believe no one's requested this on Patreon yet. It's a good book. And oh my gosh, is this the last book? This is Certain Dark Things by Sylvia Manero Garcia, which if you want more vampire books by people of color, this has come highly recommended. I actually just got this for my birthday, so I haven't read it yet, but I am super excited. And thank you again to the wonderful friend who gave me this for my birthday. And have you guys watched to the very end, or am I just talking to myself now? I could just sit here and drink wine for like 10 more minutes. This wine came from a can. If you're still watching and you heard that, let me know. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and I like books, and I like spooky things to put on my bookshelf. Namely skulls. A lot of skulls. This is my little Grim Reaper friend. You know, the Grim Reaper is my favorite thing. I don't know that this is the best setup for vampire reviews I've ever had. I think maybe I've liked some of my past setups better, but at least now I don't have to drag my lights and camera downstairs every time I film. Thank you so much to all my Patreon patrons who have supported me and make vampire reviews possible, who send me things to put on my shelf, give me things to read, give me things to review. I could not do my show without you. I do this for the patrons. That's why I do so many requests. You're the ones who matter. Thank you. If you're not a Patreon patron, I love you too. I'm just so happy you're watching. And if you watched all the way to the end of this video, you must be pretty awesome. So good night. And you know what we're reviewing next? A little D&D action. That'll be fun. If you have any questions about anything I've talked about, you want more information, or you want to know where to find it, leave me a comment. I read all my comments. I don't always respond, but I will this time. So if you ask me a question, I promise to respond and let you know what's up with all this stuff. This has been an episode of my spooky vampire stuff and drowning in books. Not that there's anything wrong with drowning in books. I'm the Maven of the Eventide, and your wine from a can isn't bad.
Tick all the magic out of that one.
Stop giggling, you make the camera shake.
Love you.
This little guy was given to me by my mom, and he actually had chocolate in the bottom, and I ate all the chocolate, but...
Of all the places to store chocolate, like in the butt, that's just a bad idea.
Well, I guess it is part of his butt. It still smells like chocolate.
Don't.
Gotta redo that, because you jiggle the camera with your laughter.
You gotta admit, it's a bad marketing decision to put chocolate as the butt.
It's in his body.
It's like you're eating vampire turds.
Delicious vampire turds.
I thought I knew you. Does anyone actually?
This little guy was given to me by my mom, and he actually came with a chocolate in the bottom, but I...
You can't make it not sound that way. Okay. I'll try my best.
Do you need a tripod?
Yeah, this is why tripods are around, because I can't be trusted.